So welcome to all those attending, guests, students, faculty, mom. You didn't know you were going to be in there. I'd first like to give a couple of thank yous. First to Ken Bedini, the Vice President of Student Affairs, who's paying for Natasha's hotel while she's with us, as well as Dr. Kenneth McNeil in the English department, who paid for our dinner earlier this evening. I'd also like to thank the Budget and Management Committee, or BAM, for allocating the funds for this event. And I'd also like to thank, on a personal note, the English Club officers, as well as our advisor, Dr. Daniel Donaghy, and English Club President Andrew Garaventa. Without all of the people and organizations I mentioned, this event would not be possible. So once again, big round of applause for everybody. Here at Eastern, we are fortunate to have writers either through the English department's Visiting Writers Series, or as in this case, when they're hosted by the English Club. For myself and other students, we look forward to the opportunity to hear writers firsthand and ask questions about their background, writing process, and inspiration. It is in this spirit that we are here tonight to welcome Natasha Trethewey. Natasha was born in Gulfport, Mississippi in 1966. She received a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Georgia, an MA in poetry from Hollins University, and an MFA in creative writing from the University of Massachusetts. She is currently the Phyllis Wheatley Distinguished Chair in Poetry at Emory University in Atlanta. She has 3 books of poetry. Her first, domestic work, won her the Cave Canem Poetry Prize, which is given for the best first book by an African-American poet. This honor also earned her an introduction by the renowned poet and former U.S. Poet Laureate Rita Dove. In that introduction, Dove noted that Trethewey's poems are a place to, quote, reclaim for us that interior life where the true self flourishes, and to return there in solitary reverie for strength. Domestic work also won the Mississippi Institute for Arts and Letters Book Prize and the Lillian Smith Award for Poetry. Among her other honors are publications in the American Poetry Review, the New England Review, Callaloo, the North American Review, and the Southern Review. She earned the Bunting Fellowship from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation. In her second book, Belloxophilia, Trethewey is inspired by photographs of prostitutes from the red light district of New Orleans. Publishers Weekly said that Trethewey successfully, quote, successfully takes on the poetically dubious task of working from art and making it significantly new. All of this is a testament to her ability to redefine the status quo. In her most recent book, Native Guard, it's quite possibly her most stunning in its honesty. It is formal, yet flexible, governed in part by various explorations of poetic traditions, such as sonnets, while coupled with the cultural influence of the blues and an enlightened integration of the Mississippi landscape. Native Guard maintains a delicate balance between the narrative of the Civil War slave soldier and Trethewey's personal history, and its importance as both a poetic biography and elegy for the historically underappreciated garnered her the 2007 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. Natasha's poems touch on an array of topics such as race, history, work, and family. And yet within each subject, she embraces the poignant and rejects the cliché, rebuilds, breaks down, and rebuilds again, culminating in the revelation of the integrity of each moment. Natasha does not shy away from using personal experience in her poems, and we as readers welcome this insight to ground our perspective. Each poem is enriched by her willingness to reveal so much of herself and personal history, from the temptation in adolescence to pass for white and the inherent complications of her parents' mixed-race marriage to the death of her mother at the hands of her stepfather. It is in these complexities that we find the thesis of her work, that life is real, and poetry therefore should seek to convey that reality, that the trials and tribulations of our past can impel us to capture the inspiration of our experiences, shape our present convictions, and feed our willingness to endure. There is, of course, the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. With each poem, Natasha reminds us that we don't need 1,000 words to paint a picture, and as students, teachers, and writers, this is the lesson we must take to heart. On behalf of the students and faculty attending, as well as the English Club, it is with great pride and gratitude that we welcome Natasha Trethewey.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I've had such a lovely visit so far, and I'm just delighted to be here. I have to tell you, Dan, that when I saw you asking folks to turn off their cell phones, it reminded me of this reading that I gave at the Calabash Poetry Festival, which is in Jamaica. And it's a beautiful reading that's held, outside with the water behind you, and Kwame Dawes is the wonderful host of that. And no matter how many times he asked, he could not get people to turn off his cell phones. But it was okay because, they would ring and they would answer them and go, "Man, you are missing it. This poet is fabulous." So, if your phone rings and you want to do that, I'm cool with it. Anyway, I thought I would start tonight by reading some poems from Native Guard and then closing with some newer poems from another manuscript that I'm at work on. We are approaching, as I know you must remember, the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And this has been on my mind a whole lot lately because my hometown is Gulfport, Mississippi, which is along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, one of those towns that on August 29th, 2005, was hit by Hurricane Katrina. And I often, in the past year, since we've been approaching the anniversary, would ask audiences, if I gave a reading, what they thought of when I said Katrina. And so often, everyone said New Orleans. And one of the problems that people feel on the Gulf Coast is being forgotten. And an irony for me is that the first poem that I actually wrote for Native Guard, which became the first poem in the book, was very much a figurative musing on the inability for any of us to go home, not because the places that we came from had changed, but because we had changed. I was thinking about Flannery O'Connor's words, "Where you came from is gone, where you are going never was there, and where you are is no good unless you can get away from it." When I wrote this poem, it was quite figurative, but by August 29th, it became literal. Theories of time and space. You can get there from here, though there's no going home. Everywhere you go will be somewhere you've never been. Try this. Head south on Mississippi 49, one by one, mile markers ticking off another minute of your life. Follow this to its natural conclusion. Dead end at the coast, the pier at Gulfport, where riggings of shrimp boats are loose stitches in a sky threatening rain. Cross over the man-made beach, 26 miles of sand dumped on the mangrove swamp, buried terrain of the past. Bring only what you must carry, tome of memory, its random blank pages. On the dock where you board the boat for Ship Island, someone will take your picture. The photograph, who you were, will be waiting when you return. Oh, thanks. The Southern Crescent is the name of an old train, and part of its route was between New Orleans and Atlanta. I know, Amanda, you like this poem, right? This is one of your marked ones, so here goes. The Southern Crescent. In 1959, my mother is boarding a train. She is barely 16, her one large grip bulging with homemade dresses, whisper of crinoline and lace, her name stitched inside each one. She is leaving behind the dirt roads of Mississippi, the film of red dust around her ankles, the thin whistle of wind through the floorboards of the shotgun house, the very idea of home. Ahead of her, days of travel, one town after the next, and California, a word she can't stop repeating. Over and over, she will practice meeting her father, imagine how he must look, how different now from the one photo she has of him. She will look at it once more, pulling into the station at Los Angeles, and then again and again on the platform. No one like him in sight. The year the old Crescent makes its last run, my mother insists we ride it together. We leave Gulfport late morning heading east. Years before, we rode together to meet another man, my father, waiting for us as our train derailed. I don't recall how she must have held me, how her face sank as she realized, again, the uncertainty of it all. That trip, too, gone wrong. Today, she is sure we can leave home, bound only for whatever awaits us. The sun now setting behind us, the rails humming like anticipation, the train pulling us toward the end of another day. I watch each small town pass before my window until the light goes and the reflection of my mother's face appears, clearer now as evening comes on, dark and certain. This next poem has an epigraph from Robert Herrick that reads, "Fair daffodils we weep to see, you haste away so soon." One of the things that I was thinking about when I wrote it is that I just wanted to tell this simple story of picking flowers for my mother. But of course, beyond doing that, the poem really didn't go anywhere else. And I had remembered learning as a child that flowers had a kind of symbolism, that there was a language, and that if you went to someone's home, there were flowers that were appropriate in color and type for the occasion. And so that was one of the questions I had as I started writing it. And I got stuck in the middle of it. And whenever I get stuck in the middle of a poem, I go and I read my OED. I look up words that I think I already know. And on this particular occasion, I had in a very pedestrian way, simply titled the poem Daffodils. And so I went and looked up the word daffodils. And when I did, I learned some things that I didn't know before. One, that daffodils are a narcissus flower. And so I had a new title. But I also immediately had the myth of Narcissus walk right into the poem as well. And so I began to think about my own kind of desire to please my mother, to get praise from her by picking her the flowers. The other thing that came in was that daffodils have an early spring. They bloom early and they die early. And my mother died just shy of her 41st birthday. So the overarching metaphor entered the poem for me at that moment, too. This is Genus Narcissus. The road I walked home from school was dense with trees and shadow, creekside and lit by yellow daffodils, early blossoms bright against winter's last gray days. I must have known they grew wild, thought no harm in taking them. So I did, gathering up as many as I could hold, then presenting them in a jar to my mother. She put them on the sill, and I sat nearby, watching light bend through the glass, day easing into evening, proud of myself for giving my mother some small thing. Childish vanity. I must have seen in them some measure of myself, the slender stems, each blossom a head lifted up toward praise, or bowed to meet its reflection. Walking home those years ago, I knew nothing of Narcissus or the daffodil's short spring, how they dry like graveside flowers, rustling when the wind blew, a whisper treacherous from the sill. Be taken with yourself, they said to me. Die early to my mother. Graveyard Blues. It rained the whole time we were laying her down. rain from church to grave when we put her down. The suck of mud at our feet was a hollow sound. When the preacher called out, I held up my hand. When he called for a witness, I raised my hand. Death stops the body's work, the soul's a journeyman. The sun came out when I turned to walk away, glared down on me as I turned and walked away, my back to my mother, leaving her where she lay. The road going home was pocked with holes, that home-going road's always full of holes. Though we slow down, time's wheel still rolls. I wander now among names of the dead, my mother's name, stone pillow for my head. So I have to tell you that when I started writing Native Guard, I only thought I was interested in this Civil War history. I'd been going out to Ship Island my whole life and never knew anything about the history of these black soldiers who were stationed there. And so that was the thing that interested me and got me doing a lot of research. And so the day that I was, there was a day that I was at home and I was jogging through this graveyard near my house, and there's a Civil War graveyard there. And I kept thinking when I got home that I was going to write poems about those Civil War soldiers who were buried there, those Confederate soldiers whose names seemed to call out to me that day to be spoken aloud. But when I got home, the poem that I wrote was actually the one I just read, Graveyard Blues. And it seemed like the right thing to do, at least in terms of the poem's emotional geography. That final couplet, I wander now among names of the dead, my mother's name, stone pillow for my head, meant to suggest the kind of cold comfort that any of us might get from being able to go to the graveyard and lay our heads down on the stone of someone that we've lost. Except that when I wrote them, I realized that I had told a lie. 20 years after my mother's death, I was very neglectful as a daughter. I was yet to erect a monument on her grave. And it was at that moment that I realized what my mother had in common with those black soldiers to whom no monuments had been erected. And I knew that these poems belonged in the same book. But because I also felt that I had an obligation to truth, I wanted to fix the fact that I had told this lie. And so I wrote another poem that appears in the very end of the book that tries to at least acknowledge what I have done and what I've said in that other poem. One of the most interesting things for me about writing, and I know you must also have this experience, of learning a word that you hadn't known because you're working on a poem, and or learning something else about a word that you thought you knew. The poem is called Monument, and what I learned looking at my OED working on this poem is that an ordinary old ant mound, you know, when you see ants building a mound, is also a monument. Monument. Today the ants are busy beside my front steps, weaving in and out of the hill they're building. I watch them emerge and, like everything I've forgotten, disappear into the subterranean, a world made by displacement. In the cemetery last June, I circled, lost, weeds and grass grown up all around, the landscape blurred and waving. At my mother's grave, ants streamed in and out like arteries, a tiny hill rising above her untended plot. Bit by bit, red dirt piled up, spread like a rash on the grass. I watched a long time the ants' determined work, how they brought up soil of which she will be part, and piled it before me. Believe me when I say I've tried not to begrudge them their industry, this reminder of what I haven't done. Even now, the mound is a blister on my heart, a red and humming swarm. And this next poem is a palindrome, and it relies a little bit on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Myth. I was asleep while you were dying. It's as if you slipped through some rift, a hollow I make between my slumber and my waking, the Erebus I keep you in, still trying not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow, but in dreams you live, so I try taking you back into morning. Sleep heavy, turning, my eyes open, I find you do not follow. Again and again, this constant forsaking. Again and again, this constant forsaking. My eyes open, I find you do not follow. You back into morning, sleep heavy, turning. But in dreams you live, so I try taking, not to let go. You'll be dead again tomorrow. The Erebus I keep you in, still trying, I make between my slumber and my waking. It's as if you slipped through some rift, a hollow. I was asleep while you were dying. So, in 1961, when the president was born, there were still over 20 states that had anti-miscegenation laws on the books, including, my home state, Mississippi, many other states in the Deep South, Georgia, Alabama, also Oklahoma. And even just over 10 years ago, the state of Alabama voted whether or not to get rid of their anti-miscegenation laws from the books. And even though they voted to get rid of them, about 40-some% of the population voted to keep them, so that at least symbolically it could be said that parents like mine couldn't be married legally and people like me born legally in the state. And if you've paid attention to the news, you know that about a month ago, a judge in the state of Louisiana also tried to violate the civil rights of an interracial couple by preventing them from getting married. This is miscegenation. In 1965, my parents broke 2 laws of Mississippi. They went to Ohio to marry, returned to Mississippi. They crossed the river into Cincinnati, a city whose name begins with a sound like sin, the sound of wrong, miss in Mississippi. A year later, they moved to Canada, followed a route the same as slaves, the train slicing the white glaze of winter, leaving Mississippi. Faulkner's Joe Christmas was born in winter, like Jesus, given his name for the day he was left at the orphanage, his race unknown in Mississippi. My father was reading War and Peace when he gave me my name. I was born near Easter, 1966, in Mississippi. When I turned 33, my father said, "It's your Jesus year. You're the same age he was when he died." It was spring, the hills green in Mississippi. I know more than Joe Christmas did. Natasha is a Russian name, though I'm not. It means Christmas child, even in Mississippi. Since I read that, I feel like I need to just go back and read one poem from my first book, Domestic Work, because there's such a lovely story about my parents meeting behind this poem. My mother, a black woman from Mississippi, and my father, a white man from rural Nova Scotia, met at Kentucky State College, which is one of the historically all-black colleges and universities. And it was quite by accident that my father ended up there. He had graduated from high school at 16 and was looking for an American college or university that he could afford to go to. And he got out a guide and found Kentucky State, and they actually were willing to give him a track scholarship. So he hitchhiked all the way down there without knowing it was a black college until he arrived. This was at the same time that the Righteous Brothers had sort of come onto the scene. You know, you've lost that love and feeling. And my mother told me the story about how she and her roommates were all eager to see the Righteous Brothers. They were going to come on TV on like the Ed Sullivan Show or something like that. And of course, all the black women in this dorm assumed, because of those soulful voices, that these white boys were black. And so they all gathered around the TV in the lounge to see the Righteous Brothers, and they came on just as my father went jogging by the window. And it was love at first sight. Early evening, Frankfort, Kentucky. It is 1965. I am not yet born, only a fullness beneath the empire waist of my mother's blue dress. The ruffles at her neck are waves of light in my father's eyes. He carries a slim volume, leather-bound, poems to read as they walk. The long road past the college, through town, rises and falls before them, the blue hills shimmering at twilight. The stacks at the distillery exhale, and my parents breathe evening air, heady and sweet as Kentucky bourbon. They are young and full of laughter, the sounds in my mother's throat rippling down into my blood. My mother, who will not reach 41, steps into the middle of a field, lies down among clover and sweetgrass, right here, right now, dead center of her life. It was always stunning to me to think that how none of us know exactly when we've reached the middle. Many people who won't know when they've reached the end. You know, W.S. Merwin has that great poem about the anniversary of his death, you know, that he's passed it every year. You know, you don't know what it is. And so, you know, writing that poem made me think, yeah, it's kind of morbid, isn't it? Yeah, when you think about it. I know, I think about this kind of stuff all the time. But, but writing that poem just made me, sort of writing some of these poems for me was at a point where I think I was really beginning to recognize my own mortality. And sort of imagining my mother at 21, thinking you have so much time ahead of you, and there she was, right in the middle. My mother dreams another country. Already the words are changing. She is changing from colored to Negro, black still years ahead. This is 1966. She is married to a white man, and there are more names for what grows inside her. It is enough to worry about words like mongrel and the infertility of mules and mulattoes while flipping through a book of baby names. She has come home to wait out the long months, her room unchanged since she's been gone, dolls winking down from every shelf, all of them white. Every day she is flanked by the rituals of superstition, and there is a name she will learn for this too, maternal impression, the shape like an unknown country marking the back of the newborn's thigh. For now, women tell her to clear her head, to steady her hands, or she'll gray a lock of the child's hair wherever she worries her own, imprint somewhere the outline of a thing she craves too much. They tell her to stanch her cravings by eating dirt. All spring she has sat on her hands, her fingers numb. For a while each day she can't feel anything she touches, the arbor out back, the landscape's green tangle, the molehill of her own swelling. Here, outside the city limits, cars speed by, clouds of red dust in their wake. She breathes it in, Mississippi, then drifts toward sleep, thinking of some place she's never been. Late, Mississippi is a dark backdrop bearing down on the windows of her room. On the TV in the corner, the station signs off, broadcasting its nightly salutation, the waving stars and stripes, our national anthem. Southern Gothic. I have lain down into 1970, into the bed my parents will share for only a few more years. Early evening, they have not yet turned from each other in sleep, their bodies curved, parentheses framing the separate lives they'll wake to. Dreaming, I am again the child with too many questions, the endless why and why and why. My mother cannot answer, her mouth closed, a gesture toward her future, cold lips stitched shut. The lines in my young father's face deepen toward an expression of grief. I have come home from the schoolyard with the words that shadow us in this small southern town. Peckerwood and nigger lover, half-breed and zebra, words that take shape outside us. We're huddled on the tiny island of bed, quiet in the language of blood, the house unsteady on its cinder block haunches, sinking deeper into the muck of ancestry. Oil lamps flicker around us, our shadows, dark glyphs on the wall, bigger and stranger than we are. Incident. We tell the story every year, how we peered from the windows, shades drawn, though nothing really happened, the charred grass now green again. We peered from the windows, shades drawn, at the cross trussed like a Christmas tree, the charred grass still green. Then we darkened our rooms, lit the hurricane lamps. At the cross, trussed like a Christmas tree, a few men gathered, white as angels in their gowns. We darkened our rooms and lit hurricane lamps, the wicks trembling in their fonts of oil. It seemed the angels had gathered, white men in their gowns. When they were done, they left quietly. No one came. The wicks trembled all night in their fonts of oil. By morning, the flames had all dimmed. When they were done, the men left quietly. No one came. Nothing really happened. By morning, all the flames had dimmed. We tell the story every year. You know, growing up in the Deep South, anybody in here from the Deep South? Anybody? Oh, one person. Where are you from? Okay. Where's that? Okay. Oh, yeah, all right. I thought I saw another hand. Somebody else? Yeah. Where are you from?
Well, I lived in Jonesboro.
Okay, so also we've got some Georgians in here right now. Well, you know, you guys probably know this. I mean, you know, but I don't know. Those of you who travel down there, I know you have family down there. You know that one of the crazy things about traveling around the South, you know, based on the naming of roads and monuments and bridges and all that kind of stuff, is that if you didn't know any better, you might think that the South won the war. So. It's true. I mean, you know, and that can really kind of create a kind of psychological exile, you know, when everything is named for a staunch segregationist or, you know, the person who founded the Klan or, you know. So, you know, these sort of things are sort of everywhere around the South. And so I really grew up with this sense of psychological exile. Also, you know, the flag debate, you know, that's sort of raging down there. One time in the newspaper, I read an editorial that said, all true Southerners love that flag. And so with one fell swoop, it tells you you're not a Southerner. So there's always so many ways in the Deep South that the South tells me I am not a natural. I am not of the South. Not to mention the fact that, you know, they rendered me illegal when I was born. So, I mean, just think about that. Think about psychological exile. And, you know, even now, you know, we're still having debates like this. And it's particularly psychologically crazy for me because, you know, the great thing about being in the North is that my birthday is Patriots Day up here, but it's Confederate Memorial Day in the South. So I was actually born 100 years to the day that Mississippi first celebrated Confederate Memorial Day, the daughter of miscegenation in a state that rendered me illegal. Home sweet home. Or as I like to say, Mississippi goddamn. This poem has an epigraph from E.O. Wilson that reads, "Homo sapiens is the only species to suffer psychological exile." South. I return to a stand of pines, bone-thin phalanx flanking the roadside, tangle of understory, a dialectic of dark and light, and magnolias blossoming like afterthought, each flower a surrender, white flags draped among the branches. I return to Land's End, the swath of coast clear-cut and buried in sand, mangrove, live oak, gulf weed raised and replaced by thin palms, palmettos, symbols of victory or defiance, over and over, marking this vanquished land. I return to a field of cotton, hallowed ground as slave legend goes, each bowl holding the ghosts of generations, those who measured their days by the heft of sacks and links of rows, whose sweat flecked the cotton plants still sewn into our clothes. I return to a country battlefield where colored troops fought and died, Port Hudson where their bodies swelled and blackened beneath the sun, unburied until Earth's green sheet pulled over them, unmarked by any headstones. Where the roads, buildings, and monuments are named to honor the Confederacy, where that old flag still hangs, I return to Mississippi, state that made a crime of me. Mulatto, half-breed, native in my native land, this place they'll bury me. So I'm just going to finish up now with just a few newer poems. I've been working on a lot more ekphrastic poems, poems about the Mexican Costa paintings. And if any of you are familiar with the Mexican Costa paintings, then you know that they represented in colonial Mexico all the mixed blood unions that were taking place in the colony. And they were really interesting because they were always in series of 16. They began with the father, the white father, and then the blood mixtures sort of degrading, as you went down. They also presented the families as if it was like mixing paint, like you put this one with this one and you get that thing right there. And what was really interesting to me, too, about it is that they created, some really fascinating taxonomies, some language to name these people. So they had things like, here's another thing. They believed two things. One, that indigenous blood could be, over a few generations, purified back to whiteness, but that the taint of African blood was irreversible. So they came up with names like mulatto returning backwards, hold yourself in midair, or I don't understand you. And so these names would be written right on the paintings. And if you were a mixed blood of any kind born into colonial Mexico, your name would be written down in the Book of Castas, and that sort of puts you permanently in your place. So this is after a series by Juan Rodriguez Suarez, circa 1715. Taxonomy. 1. De Español y de India produce mestizo. The canvas is a leaden sky behind them, heavy with words, gold letters inscribing an equation of blood. This plus this equals this, as if a contract with nature, or a museum label, ethnographic, precise. See how the father's hand, beneath its crown of lace, curls around his daughter's head. She's nearly fair as he is, calidad. See it in the brooch at her collar, the lace framing her face. An infant, she is borne over the servant's left shoulder, bound to him by a sling, the plain blue cloth knotted at his throat. If the father, his hand on her skull, divines, as the physiognomist does, the mysteries of her character, discursive, legible on her light flesh, in the soft curl of her hair, we cannot know it, so gentle the eye he turns toward her. the mother glancing sideways toward him, the scarf on her head, white as his face, his powdered wig, gestures with one hand a shape like the letter C. See, she seems to say, what we have made. The servant, still a child, cranes his neck, turns his face up toward all of them. He is dark as history, origin of the word native, the weight of blood, a pale mistress on his back, heavier every year. 2. De Español y Negra produce mulatto. Still, the centuries have not dulled the sullenness of the child's expression. If there is light inside him, it does not shine through the paint that holds his face in profile, his domed forehead, eyes nearly closed beneath a heavy brow. Though inside, the boy's father stands in his cloak and hat, it's as if he's just come in, or that he's leaving. We see him transient, rolling a cigarette, myopic, his eyelids drawn against the child passing before him. At the stove, the boy's mother contorts, watchful, her neck twisting on its spine, red beads yoked at her throat like a necklace of blood, her face so black she nearly disappears into the canvas, the dark wall upon which we see the words that name them. What should we make of any of this? Remove the words above their heads, put something else in place of the child, a table perhaps upon which the man might set his hat, or a dog upon which to bestow the blessing of his touch, and the story changes. The boy is a palimpsest of paint, layers of color, history rendering him that precise shade of in-between. Before this, he was nothing, blank canvas, before image or word, before a last brushstroke fixed him in his place. 3. De Español y Mestiza produce Castiza. How not to see in this gesture the mind of the colony? In the mother's arms, the child hinged at her womb, dark cradle of mixed blood, call it Mexico, turns toward the father, reaching to him as if back to Spain, to the promise of blood alchemy, 3 easy steps to purity. From a Spaniard and an Indian, a mestizo. From a mestizo and a Spaniard, a castizo. From a castizo and a Spaniard, a Spaniard. We see her here, 1 generation away, nearly slipping her mother's careful grip. 4. The Book of Castas. Call it the Catalogue of Mixed Bloods, or the Book of Not Spaniard, not white, but mulatto returning backwards, or Hold Yourself in Midair, and the Morisca, the Lobo, the Chino, Sambo, Albino, and the No Te Entiendo, the I Don't Understand You. Guidebook to the colony, record of each crossed birth, it is the typology of taint, of stain, blemish, sullying spot, that which can be purified, that which cannot, Canaan's black fate, how like a dirty joke it seems. What do you call that space between the dark geographies of sex? Call it the taint, as in it tain't one and it tain't the other. Illicit and yet naming still what is between. Between her parents, the child, mulatto, returning backwards, cannot slip their hold. The triptych their bodies make, in paint, in blood, her name, written down in the book of Castas, all her kind, in thrall to a word. And I'm going to close now with a last poem. This is after a chalk drawing by J.H. Hasselhorst, 1864. Knowledge. Whoever she was, she comes to us like this, lips parted, long hair spilling from the table like water from a pitcher, nipples drawn out for inspection. Perhaps to foreshadow the object she'll become, a skeleton on a pedestal, a row of skulls on a shelf. To make a study of the ideal female proportions, 4 men gather around her. She is young and beautiful and drowned, a Venus de Medici risen from the sea, sleeping. As if we could mistake this work for sacrilege, the artist entombs her body in a pyramid of light, a temple of science over which the anatomist presides. In the service of beauty, to know it, he lifts a flap of skin beneath her breast, as one might draw back a sheet. We will not see his step-by-step parsing, a translation, Mary or Catherine or Elizabeth to corpus, areola, vulva. In his hands, instruments of the empirical, scalpel, pincers, cold as the room must be cold, all the men in coats trimmed in velvet or fur, soft as the down of her pubis. One man is smoking, another tilts his head to get a better look. Yet another at the head of the table peers down as if enthralled, his fist on a stack of books. In the drawing, this is only the first cut, a delicate wounding, and yet how easily the anatomist's blade opens a place in me, like a curtain drawn upon a room in which each learned man is my father. And I hear again his words, I study my crossbreed child, a misnomer, the language of zoology, natural philosophy. In this scene, he is the preoccupied man, an artist, collector of experience, the skeptic angling his head, his thoughts tilting toward what I cannot know, the marshaller of knowledge, knuckling down a stack of books, even the dissector, his scalpel in hand like a pen poised above me, aimed straight for my heart. Thank you.